The shadow over Hydra Cordatus. Hansu watched as the fortress burned and monsters moved amidst the ruins of the dead. The Comedian citadel, which had stood since the days of the Great Crusade, had fallen. The Iron Warriors had fought well, no one could claim otherwise, and the Imperial Guards that had done their best too, Hansu had to admit. If all they had faced had been the numberless hordes of the 19th Legion, then he had no doubt the walls would have held. This was a 4th Legion world, and the day hadn't come when mere numbers would be enough to break something built by the sons of Perturabo. No one knew how the Raven Guard had made it past the Iron Cage, especially in such numbers. It didn't matter though. Finding the holes and closing it would be a job for the Legion's high command. The Iron Warriors on Hydra Cordatus simply had to repel the invasion, and for the first month of the siege, they had done an excellent job of it, piling the corpses of their foes on the fields surrounding the Comedian citadel. But then Corax had come. The sorcerer of the Raven Guard had drenched the rock in blood, and with their foul sorceries had torn a hole in the fabric of the universe, through which their Dark Lord had come. The living walls of the citadel, built from the long-lost technology to be able to repair themselves, had developed cancer-like defects, hideous amalgamations of flesh and stone rising from the battlements to attack the shocked defenders. Warsmith Sean too had managed to get the Astropathic Choir to send a warning to the Imperium. It had started as a call for help, but it had soon become obvious no help could possibly arrive fast enough. All that mattered was to get word to the Imperium that the Raven Lord had returned. Then the old Iron Warrior had put the Astropath out of their misery, commending their spirit to the Emperor before killing them. Hansu had been by his commander's side then, and he knew that it had been a mercy. The blind witches had taken the arrival of Corax worse than anyone else on the planet, and no one had taken it well. There had been a surge in summary executions within the ranks of the Imperial Guard, as commissars put down soldiers driven mad by the Raven Lord's arrival. In 8 separate cases, the soldier's body had begun to change after his execution, and had to be destroyed with fire and explosives. The magnified psychers had all just pulled out their service weapons and blown their own heads off, and the librarians had been unable to call upon their powers at all, lest they invite the corruption of Corax within themselves. The Raven Lord had crippled the defenders simply by being here, and then things had gotten worse when he had taken to the field. Corax had walked through the broken walls and into the citadel, and nothing the Iron Warriors had could so much as touch him. 3 of the fortress's Warhound Titans charged the Demon Primarch together, only to fall writhing on the ground, cancerous flesh growing from their joints as the crew inside was hideously warped by Corax's will. They had risen again a few minutes later and turned on their former allies with warp-infused weapons, driven by a terrible hunger for death. Such was the might of a Demon Primarch in the fullness of his power. Other creatures had come with Corax, following the Raven Lord through the rifts his coming had opened into the reality. Terrible, immense things with too many limbs that had climbed over the walls and plucked unfortunate souls from the battlements to feast on them, while bolter and laser fire ricocheted harmlessly off or passed directly through them. In the wake of the Raven Lord and his giant horrors had come the hordes of mutants and spawn marines, driven to new heights of fanaticism by the presence of their long-absent master. Even the Trueborn, usually distant overlords to their teeming slaves, had joined the fight, eager to fight alongside their Primarch once again. As madness descended onto the battlefield, the legendary discipline of the Iron Warriors imposed on their surroundings had collapsed, and the battle had degenerated into chaotic melee, which played much more to the advantage of the traitor Legion. Hansu had seen Shontu died, slain by the cruel talons of the Chaos Lord Kaivan. Then he too had been felled, though his opponent hadn't seen fit to finish the job. His wound was bad. One of his hearts was gone, as were 2 of his lungs, and his spinal column was broken in several places, paralyzing him completely below the neck. He had laid where he had fallen, forced to watch as the battle ended in the slaughter of the Imperial defenders. Something cold and vile crawled up his spine, and the figure of the Raven Lord entered his field of vision. Up close, Corax was even more revolting than he had been where Honshu had first glimpsed him from kilometers away, immediately after his arrival onto Hydra Cordatus. He was darkness made manifest, a wound onto reality through which the madness of chaos undivided bled. Honshu's mind kept trying to put some familiar images onto what he saw, placing armor the color of the void onto the demon Primarch, but Corax's horrific nature always pierced through. Only his face betrayed the slightest resemblance with humanity, pale as death and crossed by black veins. Well, said Corvus Corax, and his voice was like the death of sanity and the promise of every horror the galaxy had ever known, along with many it had only dreamt of, and the dark places where angels fear to tread. What do we have here? Honshu tried to speak, but found that he couldn't. He could barely breathe, and that had nothing to do with his wounds. This close to the demon Primarch, his infernal presence was a battering to the senses. Every sensory organ of Honshu was revolting against what they were registering, and the Iron Warrior could feel his very soul being tainted simply by being in such close proximity to the nightmarish entity that had once, very long ago, been one of the Emperor's sons. From iron cometh strength, he thought, clinging to the familiar words of the litany. From strength cometh will, from will cometh faith, from faith cometh honor, from honor. Honshu found that he couldn't think of the next part of the litany. It was taking all of his will to hold on to his sanity in the face of Corax's presence. The Raven Lord looked at him, and something like interest flicked in the pits of unholy darkness he had for eyes. There is strength left in you, mused Corax, watching Honshu. A great deal of strength for one of Perturabo's unimaginative yet. I think, yes, it would be a waste to let you die here. The Raven Lord bent over Honshu and reached out with a clawed hand to touch the dying Space Marine's forehead. There was a surprising gentleness in the motion, but the contact of the demon Primarch's claw sent Honshu screaming. His flesh started to melt like wax under the touch, and he could feel his bones bending out of shape even as his organs were twisting by the warping energies Corax was pouring into him. Astartes were naturally resistant to mutation, their genetics anchored into shape by the strength of the Emperor's design. But Corax's power was simply too great. His armor broke apart as his body swelled, his augmentics were pushed out of his flesh, and his very soul was violated by the undiluted essence of Chaos Undivided. By the time Honshu stopped screaming, there was nothing in what was left of him to indicate it had ever been a proud son of Perturabo. Nothing indeed to indicate he had ever been human at all. The Iron Warrior had been transmuted into a grotesque cocoon of pulsating skin through which strange shapes could be glimpsed, moving as their hyper-evolution continued. The Raven Lord withdrew his hand, looked upon his work, and thought it good. "Bring him aboard," commanded Corax to the apothecaries that had gathered and were watching the cocoon with open fascination. "Make sure he is taken care of until the process is complete. Come, my sons, there's much work for us to do. But for now, we are going home." Far above, in the war-torn skies of Hydra Cordatus, a shape began to appear, emerging from the Empyrean directly above the planet, in violation of all the laws of warp travel. The thing had once been the Shadow of the Emperor, a Gloriana-class flagship of the 19th Legion, loomed over the world like a terrible, hungry god of primordial myth. It hadn't been since the unborn crusade, when the Raven Lord had emerged from his isolation to lead his legion out of the Eye and through an orc-ravaged Imperium, all to destroy the one the Ultramarines called the Ascended One. Not even the sons of Corax themselves knew with any certainty why the demon Primarch had decided to act back then. though there were plenty of theories, and more than one Trueborn had used it as justification for his own attacks and betrayals of the 13 legions since then. The shadow of the Emperor seemed to fill the sky, impossibly huge yet only half there, remaining halfway between reality and the immaterium, like a leviathan of the depths rising just below the surface, watching the land dwellers with hate-filled eyes that had evolved beyond the need for light or warmth. The few guardsmen who had survived and been lucky enough to avoid looking upon the Raven Lord went mad as its shadow fell upon them, and its horrible whispers filled their ears. The stolen gene seed of Hydra Cordatus was brought aboard the Leviathan. There, in the same laboratories where the crew of the Shadow had been resurrected into new and terrible shapes after the Legion's first journey to the Eye of Terror, the sacred progenoids of the 4th Legion would be remade. Then the trip back to the Raven Guard's homeworld, the apothecaries would defile and alter them, imbue them with powers of chaos and blood of the Raven Lord. With such a bounty, the decaying system that created the Spawn Marines would be revitalized. The Legion's diminishing numbers of slave warriors would be replenished, and then, well, it all depends on the Raven Lord's wishes. With his return, the coalition of warlords that had led the attack on Hydra Cordatus were no longer in command. Kyavan, the lastborn, leader of the group, was on his way to the Shadow to meet his gene sire for the first time and make his formal vow of allegiance to the Raven Lord. The ship of the warband settled into proximative formation around the Shadow of the Emperor. Aboard them, the Raven Guard and their thralls were exultant, revealing the Raven Lord's return from his long self-imposed exile in the Raven Spire on the Legion's demonic homeworld. After 10,000 years of freedom, some were less enthusiastic than others, but none dare speak discontent out loud. The Trueborn knew the purpose for which their legion had been forged, and the Spawn Marines would follow their master's orders, whatever they might be. One by one, the ships vanished, drawn back into the Imperium, following paths through the warp and back to their stronghold, known only to Korax. The echoes of their departure spread into the Sea of Souls, pushing astropathic messages sent by Warsmith Hansu onward even as they corrupted its contents. On 1,000 worlds, people woke from their slumber, covered in cold sweat, or did not wake at all, their dead faces frozen in a rictus of abject horror. Eventually, the message made it to its intended destination. But by then, every Chaos Cult, every wandering warband knew the truth. Korax had returned.